over to you, Nigel.
Well, thank you, Kayla. Good morning, everybody. I'm really thrilled to meet you for two reasons. One, it's kind of my job to do this sort of thing. I'll explain my job in a minute. But two, because I'm a fellow Devonian. I'm speaking to you from my Zoom cave here in Totnes. So as Kayla says, I'm in the UN high-level climate action for climate change. What that means is that I've been appointed by the UK government. It's one of their jobs is to appoint me to a role which was created as part of the Paris Agreement to work with everybody who's not a government, so businesses, civil society, cities, investors, to drive ambition and action on climate change. So I'm always up for a conversation with a group like you who are grappling with how do we actually manage this transition. Some of my role, so I don't work for the UK government. I'm appointed by them, but my mandate comes from the UN, and I work globally from Totnes, which is quite interesting. I'm going to share my screen and just go through a few slides to kind of give you more of a flavour of what's going on globally in what we call the race to zero. So let me just share screen, make sure I've got the right slides and. Right, can I just check that somebody give me some thumbs up that you can see that? Great, thank you, Kevin. So I want to tell you a little bit about what the rest of the world is doing and really emphasize why this year is so important. So what's the UK doing, first of all? Well, now the UK has declared this year a year of climate action. You probably all know that the UK has made a legal commitment to get to net zero by the middle of the century, which net zero just means that what we emit is netted off by what we suck out of the atmosphere. In effect, it really means getting as close to zero as possible because we can't suck much out, but there are some things that we don't yet know how to completely stop. For example, cows burping. But there's then very, very clear targets: 68% by 2030, 78% by 2035. And importantly, although the governments have already published lots of policies, we're expecting to see a full suite of net zero policies saying how they're going to meet those interim 2030 targets coming out by the end of the year. The UK has a fantastic bit of policy making infrastructure, which lots of other countries are copying. The UK, when it created its Climate Change Act, created a body which sits outside of the political cycle. So it's a non-political body called the Climate Change Committee, which advises governments on 5-yearly carbon budgets. So it makes recommendations. So the 68% and the 78% were recommendations from the Climate Change Committee, which Parliament accepted. It also holds the government to account. So you will see reports saying how well the government's doing, including one that just came out very recently that said, I think, sort of 9 out of 10 on ambition, 4 out of 10 on action. So if you want to inform yourself in some of the detailed policies that are present or aren't yet present, the reports of the Climate Change Committee are a really useful source. Now, of course, really importantly, and the reason that I've got this job is because the UK will be the president of COP26 in Glasgow this year. Being the president means they run the process that goes from one country to another every year, and I'll explain a bit more about what that is now. So COP stands for Conference of the Parties. It's a bit of technical sort of UN speak. That means the parties are the countries who are parties to the UN Convention on Climate Change, and they meet every year. So this is the 26th meeting. There's a technical core to the meeting, which is countries who've signed that original agreement and who have now created the Paris Agreement, but also those non-state actors, the people who I'm responsible for working with, like businesses, civil society, investors, cities, also go. And their presence, they don't form a part of the legal negotiation, but their presence is really important because it sets a tone of pushing for ambition, of positivity that we can do this and we are getting on with it. And that's the tone in which those negotiations take place. The Paris Agreement, which I mentioned, was really the big breakthrough in this international process. It was formed in Paris in 2015 at COP21. And in simple terms, it says, we've got to get to zero, net zero. that the actual language had some wiggle room. It said the target is well below 2 degrees and really doing our best efforts to keep 1.5 degrees alive. The language of 1.5 degrees is in the Paris Agreement because the small island states, the Pacific Islanders in particular, were chanting 1.5 to stay alive, because this is literally an existential issue for them. Some of those countries will not exist if we go beyond 1.5. They're already at jeopardy now. Some of them are only 1 or 2 meters above sea level. The really important thing was that Paris said, instead of trying to negotiate top down and tell everyone what they've got to do, which is almost impossible with 195 countries, we create a process where we get every country to submit their best possible plan, which they sometimes call nationally determined contributions, and then have a ratchet and review process. So every 5 years, countries must submit a new plan, which must be more ambitious and in line with the latest science and the latest understanding of what's possible. So you could say, well, shouldn't we have something which makes everyone responsible and legally accountable? But it's just not as simple as that in an international process. And this was a really big breakthrough and led to a lot more ambition, although still nothing like enough. The other really big part of the Paris Agreement that you will hear about is, in fact, this commitment comes from earlier than Paris, a commitment from the global north, from the rich countries like ours, to help the poorer developing countries who did the least to cause climate change but are the most affected by it, with at least $100 billion a year by last year, and then looking to ratchet that up in the future. That's contentious because it wasn't very well defined exactly what's included in that. So it's quite hard to get people to agree where we are. Latest figures we have from 2018 are that we reached $80 billion, and people have been adding since then. And that's one of the big focuses of the UK presidency. Although they can't deliver it themselves, it relies on other countries all increasing their finance. So what can we expect from COP26? First thing to say is the reason there's so much focus on it is it's the first test of the Paris Agreement. Like, can the global system actually tackle climate change? And the jury is still out. So leaders from the world will be coming. Mostly we'll already know what their new commitments have been and what they add up to. So far, they are bending the curve down from the Paris commitments, which all added up to over 3 degrees, something like 3.2, 3.4 degrees. We're getting closer to a set of commitments, which are around about 2.1 degrees, still not below 2 degrees. But of course, a commitment is not the same as action. The other thing I'd say about Glasgow and COP26 is we do have a very strong emerging consensus that net zero by 2050 is our shared goal. That's the top end of Paris ambition. That's really aiming for 1.5 degrees. And a lot of that has changed in the last 12 months, really, where after a scientific report which the UN commissioned, which came out late 2018, which looked at what's the difference between well below 2 degrees, say 1.8, and 1.5. And basically it said a lot of human suffering and a lot of economic damage. And so gradually we've been finding people all agreeing we really do have to get to net zero by 2050 to stay below 1.5. So I think we can expect a strong consensus on that, and the contention, the politics will be around how well is the global north supporting the global south on finance and on resilience. You know, how are they adapting to the changes that are already in place? The final thing I'd say, and the thing that I'm focusing on because I can't affect the negotiations directly, is expect a lot of focus on evidence of progress from the real economy, and a sense of inevitability building that we really are going to have to do this and are doing this. And those people in cities or businesses who aren't already committed risk losing out. Just to put this in the context of the last COP, which was COP25, which should have been in Madrid. Normally these are 1 year apart. Of course, COP26 has been postponed by a year. First of all, it was shifted at the last minute from taking place originally in Brazil, who were going to be the hosts. Then Brazil pulled out and Chile took over, so it was going to be held in Chile. And then at the last minute, there was a lot of social disruption in Chile, so it was moved really at the last minute to happen in Madrid. The Spaniards did a fantastic job. You will remember a lot of focus on Greta Thunberg, the amazing youth activists who arrived from America by boat. A lot of the coverage focused on two things. One, the growing anger in the street. Like, we've known about this for decades. Why haven't you world leaders fixed this yet? And secondly, the fact that in Madrid, what was being negotiated was some of the detail elements of what we call the Paris rule book. Like, how do we implement Paris? Some things that might not seem that important to you, like on agreeing on standard definitions of timetables and data that every country has to submit. But remember, this is 196 countries, many of whom don't have the same technical capacity as the UK, say, small or less developed African countries, so don't want to have an overburdensome reporting arrangement. The negotiators failed to conclude some of those issues, so a lot of the focus was suggesting that Madrid was a failure. I think that in those technical terms it was. You have to also remember that during the 2 weeks of Madrid, the entire trading bloc of the EU committed to getting to net zero by 2050. So you'll find this all the time with the complexity of climate change. The glass is never entirely full nor entirely empty. But we sometimes choose to focus on the positive or the negative, but there's nearly always a bit of both. Just to finish off, we're talking about the race to zero. This is something which I and my fellow high-level champion Gonzalo Munoz from Chile launched a year ago. It's the non-state actor part of a bigger thing we call the Climate Ambition Alliance, which includes countries. We now have countries with over 70% of the world economy committed to net zero. Again, they don't all have policies in place which are adequate in the short term, but that's a significant milestone. So the Race to Zero is a UN-backed campaign to deliver that healthier, fairer, zero-carbon future we're all fighting for. And it's really about rallying everybody from businesses to cities and investors to commit to the long-term goal, some of them 2050, some 2040, some 2035, but really importantly to take real action in the next 10 years that's consistent with getting to halving of emissions by 2030s. So we run that, and it's been growing very fast. We now have over 4,500 businesses, investors, cities. We think we'll have over 1,000 cities by the time we get to Glasgow. Those cities and regions include all the states in Australia, which is interesting because the Australian federal government is not committed to net zero. Many states in America who kept the hope of America rejoining the Paris Agreement alive during the Trump years. And many UK cities who have earlier net zero dates. I think from memory, Manchester is 2038, Glasgow 2030, and Kayla and Dom will know some of the figures from some of the other cities. And 45% of the biggest 100 companies listed on the London Stock Exchange are in the race to zero. And we've recently been doing a lot of work to get investors to commit. So when an investor commits, like a pension fund, it means that they've got to start working with all the companies that they hold bits of to get them to move. So that's moving very fast, and we're really encouraged by that. What we're really focusing on more now for Glasgow is what we call sectoral breakthroughs, like what needs to happen in every sector to be in line with 1.5 degrees. And I just shared a few here. Green hydrogen is going to be an important part of the future energy system. Currently too expensive, very little of it, so we really need to ramp that up. Encouragingly, there's a lot of government commitment globally as well as private sector commitment. IT companies that we're all relying on to be able to meet remotely, all of them moving towards 100% renewable energy to power their computers and their servers. There's a great initiative run by the Climate Group in the UK called RE100. I think they just announced that their members are, between them, responsible for more renewable electricity than the entire country of Germany. So those are big signals to the market. Transport, cars, we're reaching a tipping point. We need to get to 60% being electric by 2030. Of course, the UK has already said that full combustion engines can't be sold after that, so the UK is ahead of the curve there. In transport, shipping is nearly all burning dirty fuel. We need to develop the technologies so that 5% of international shipping is zero carbon by 2030. So you can see here we can go very fast in some areas like renewables and cars because the technology is already mature, but we can't go very fast in, say, shipping or steel because the technology is not mature. What we have to do is this decade is drive the innovation. Steel's the last one I put there. Very heavy emitting process, burns coal. We can make steel using green hydrogen, and we need to have at least 20 of those new zero carbon steel plants operational by 2030. Finally, I'd say, I hope I give you a sense of the fact that this is about everybody, the whole of society acting now. So individuals, regions, cities, businesses, investors, national governments. When we all act, it makes it easier for us all to act because the risk comes down, and no one can do this on their own. What we really need to do is move in step with each other to make that easier. And so, as we often say, the race to zero, as we call it, is an unusual race in that we will only win it if we're all in it. It's a kind of all or nothing race. So with that, I'll stop. Hand back to Kayla, and very happy to with Richard to do some Q&A.